Hey everyone, my name is Joanna Hoffman and I am a spoken word poet living in Brooklyn, New York. I'm going to share some poems with you and talk to you a little bit about my journey through poetry, what poetry has meant for me, and hopefully what it can mean for you. So before I dive in, I got involved in the spoken word slam poetry scene when I was about 19. I had written poetry since I was about 13 years old. And for me, poetry has always been a way of really holding up a mirror to myself, allowing me to see aspects of myself that I may have wanted to keep hidden or maybe didn't know how to give voice to. And I actually, through poetry, that's how I realized that I was a lesbian. It's how I was able to really say that out loud for the first time was in a poem. So for me, that's really how I came out to myself. It's how I came out to friends, actually, from like sharing those poems with them. And every time I get up on a stage and perform poems about that aspect of myself, it really is a coming out process all over again, which I think is just important to keep in mind as we're wrapping up Pride Month here in the US, that coming out is not just a one time event, but it's something that LGBTQ plus people experience every day for all of our lives. Uh, and really, for me, what poetry has been a way for me to connect with people. I think that for me, the most valuable gift that poetry has given me has been human connection. And for me, it's whether I'm watching someone perform or reading a poem, and a line will just hit me in a way. And it may not be that I've had that exact same experience as the poet, or even experience similar to that. It's just they describe an emotion or an experience in a way that I can really relate to. And vice versa, there's times when I'm talking on stage about an experience that's really specific and personal to me, and then someone comes up to me after and says, "Hey, I really connected with that." For me, that's what it's all about. I think that, you know, we need ways to come together. We need ways to feel less alone. I think especially now, as we're all, socially isolating, even as our cities are opening up again in different ways. I think we all can agree that this whole COVID epidemic has been an isolating time for many people, and I think it's important that we have ways to come together through poetry, through art, through different ways of connecting. So I'm really grateful for the role that poetry has played in my life. And, before I say more about that, I'm going to just do a poem for you. It's called Hope, and this is the first spoken word poem that I ever wrote and performed, and it will always have a special place in my heart. Hope is the stupid little yellow bird who used to batter his skull against my living room window over and over and over again with unrelenting excitement, as if his next desperate surge forward could melt his wings through glass, softly shoving aside molecules for twig-like bones to pass through, and all of this for that lovebird screaming behind bars, and he wanted that bird, thought, her wings may be clipped, but man, she is fly. Wanted to make her tweet his name, and so every day for 6 months, his head thumping harmonized with the clanking of breakfast spoons. And my sister would look up from her Cheerios and say, "That bird is stupid." And all these years later, I say, no. That bird is hope. And sometimes hope seems stupid to everyone but the one hoping, and everyone hopes for something. The truth is, I pretend to be a cynic, but I am really a dreamer who is terrified of wanting something she may never get. And I just want to show you the energy that crackles beneath my veins like exposed power lines, like my potential is as infinite as these blurred faces rushing past me. And that's how I feel every time you call me, like even our silences end in dot. Like who knows what could happen. And I have no flight plan, just a speck in the distance of something that just might be close to beautiful, so why not unfold these wings, crush empty air between us like empty excuses, like this crush on you is crushing me, and I am a crush monster. I get crushes on ideas and ideals and nonprofit organizations, and I can think of nothing sweeter than spending my days making this world better. And my dad says, that's really nice, Joanna, but there are bills to pay. And I can't even tell you how many people have tossed me similar consolation prizes. Like the woman who came up to me once after a poetry reading and said, your idealism's real cute, but you'll grow up one day. And you should know, things will only get worse from here. And I should have said, lady, you had better pray I never grow up, because if there weren't people out there who believed in possibility, nothing would ever get done. I believe in evolution like a river, slowly winding its way up a mountain like a broken-winged bird, spiraling to heaven. Things can only go up from here, and miracles happen every day. So I hope for the wedding I've wanted ever since I knew how to want, and maybe hope is stupid, as long as hope is a kamikaze whisper from your lips, never meant to go anywhere but crashing down, and maybe that's why it does. But I believe in a hope that flies, like a little yellow bird soaring into your living room through a window that has been open all along. So for me, that poem was based on a true story. There really was a little bird that used to visit my window. It actually used to visit my pet bird at the time, which was a cockatiel named Rocky. And, in that poem, what I worked to do was tell a story that included like some key messages that I wanted to get out, but I made it full circle. So like I started with this really specific image of the bird banging his head against the window, and then ended with the bird soaring through the window. And so for me, that was like the first time I felt like I told a story in a full circle way that really hit the way I wanted it to. In that, meaning that it, delivered the impact that I wanted it to. And so at the time when I wrote that poem, I had really just started to perform at venues in the DC Baltimore area, which is where I grew up, about 3 hours from here, from New York City. And what I liked about spoken word poetry and slam poetry is that I had always thought about poems, maybe in a similar way to how some of you think of them, as being like the poems that I grew up reading in a book in English class. And I felt like I spent a lot of time trying to figure out just what the author was talking about, and it really wasn't clear to me. And because it wasn't clear to me, I couldn't connect to a lot of it. And what I loved about spoken word and slam poetry is that it's poetry that's meant to be accessible. It's meant for you to understand it. It's meant to be a conversation, really, in that it's supposed to be interactive. The audience is encouraged to snap, to clap, to laugh, to be a part of it. It's something that every audience member is encouraged to be involved with. So in the hopes that no one will be bored. And I really liked that. It really appealed to me. It was like a fun thing to take friends to, especially people who were like, I'm not going to like a poetry reading, but they would come to a poetry slam and really see the parallels between slam poetry and like freestyle rap. I mean, I think they are very closely related. It's really a lot about craft and lyricism and, finding creative ways to express yourself and ways we can use language to reflect our experiences in ways that are fresh and exciting. So it's a world that I really just fell in love with. And through participating in spoken word poetry, both in Washington, D.C. and then in New York City when I moved here, I had an opportunity to travel with my poetry, to go to competitions across the United States, but also to go internationally and perform. I've been very honored to perform with the Bradford Literature Festival a few years back. And it's just been an incredible experience for me to perform there. I performed in New Zealand, different countries around the world, and it just always just blows my mind the ways that poetry can bring people together. And I feel like it's time to do another poem. So I want to talk about running for a little bit. I don't know if any of you are runners, but it has been a huge part of my life. I love running, and last year I ran my first marathon in here in New York City. I was actually supposed to run it again in a few months, but they just announced today that the New York City Marathon is canceled, which was 100% the right decision. And thankfully, I've been able to keep up with my running throughout all of this. And this is called A Running List of the Ways Running Has Saved My Life. 1. My sophomore year of high school, I was so deeply closeted that when a boy on my track team called me and my best friend lesbians, I said, "You wish." And then the next day at our track meet, I lined up next to this beautiful girl and she said, "I hope you're not fast." And I said, "Don't worry, I'm not." And then I was so nervous that I took off running faster than I ever had in my life and somehow got an 800-meter personal record. And I realized then that running could translate movement into grace I never knew my body had. 2. There is no high like the runner's high. No better salve for my racing mind than to outpace it. Depression may have chased me my entire life, but I will keep outrunning the dark. 3. There were nights when my legs carried me away from the white van that followed me from school, the pack of boys that followed me from the park, the drunk guy at the party who chased me all the way to the train. Thank God for the gift of building safety out of air. 4. When I say running has saved my life, I mean there were years I hated everything about myself except how I felt when I was running. If the meaning of life is gratitude, then I found religion when my breath broke upon the crumbling edge of my body's limitations. I mean, in just the past few months, I did 2 things I never would have thought I could. I survived losing my mother, and I trained for a marathon. And there were days when grief rewrote the entire script of my life, but then I would run by the river and collect the memories back one by one. Each moment, another memory of my mother smiling into the sun, the way she would say, "You know I love you, don't you?" And I would say, "Yeah, Mom, I do." And I never thought I would believe in ghosts, but I saw my mom during the Staten Island half marathon and I gasped out loud. I mean, she was running right next to me. She smiled so big I couldn't help but smile back. My mom is here, I thought, and it became the soundtrack to every mile that followed. 5. When I say running has saved my life, I mean that life isn't what I imagined it might be. And sometimes that feels like a failure, but when I run down the hill in Prospect Park towards the lake, it's just me and maybe my mother, and this feeling I don't need to name, but it unravels from me, and the release is a prayer, and my mother says my name, and each mile becomes more time I spend with her. 6. The marathon brought me to my knees, and maybe this time running saved me by reminding me I can't do it all alone. And sometimes we're taught that being an adult means to deal with your problems as quietly as possible, but grief is loud. And so is a city that rises to push 52,000 runners to glory some of us never believed we could earn. So hallelujah for cheer signs and water stations and medical tents and every friend along the way who said my name with such kindness, I forgot I was still even moving forward. Because that is what friends are for. To make the simple act of one footfall after another as easy as breath, even when it hurts, and especially when it does. So that poem really captures, I think for me, what a special force running has been in my life. And really what it's meant for me in terms of a way of dealing with my emotions. I mean, that specific poem, as you heard, was about grief. But I think for me, both running and poetry have really been like conduits of difficult emotions for me. They've been ways for me to process things that would have been a struggle for me otherwise. And I just feel really lucky to have those two outlets in my life. I really can't imagine my life without them. So I'm going to read something that I wrote fairly recently, and it's really about what it's been like for me being in New York City during COVID-19. Um, I know a lot of places have been really hit hard by the epidemic. At the time when I wrote this, New York City was being hit really hard, and I got sick. Thankfully, I made a full recovery, and this is about that experience. It's called Maybe This Is What It Means to Love Something. This morning, I stepped outside with a bag of recycling, and the elderly man next door who takes the trash to the curb said, "Give it to me, don't worry." And I said, "No, please," and I put it in the bin, and he said, "Lady, you have a beautiful day." And I didn't tell him that I do worry for him, for the woman across the hall with an oxygen tank, for my dad 3 states away that may as well be 3,000 miles. 2 weeks ago, when I was so sick with fever and chills, I thrashed in the sheets all night long. I called out, "Mommy," and she said, "Yes, sweetie." And I said, "I don't want to die alone." And she said, "Listen to me. You are never alone." And who knows if it was her or my fevered brain working to love me. And what is the difference, really, between what we think we remember and the legacy of what came after? Today, I stopped in the middle of my run to gaze out at the East River. The rest of the country can think what they want, but we live here. Not everyone escaped or wanted to or could, even if we tried. A family of 4 approached me walking hand by hand, and I felt the distress rising as I tried to figure out how to safely get around them. Please, help me save us, I thought. The mother read my face and smiled before touching her son's shoulder and creating a pathway. She is the first person to see me in weeks. I'm standing on the pier, watching the water dance and breathe. I'm thinking of the way my mother would lean in with worry on her face and touch my forehead with one hand and cup my cheek with the other to see if my fever was breaking. I'm holding my city just like that. So, I think for me, that poem is a way of documenting this really specific moment in time. And I think for all of us, we are living through history right now with what's happening. And I think it was important for me to tell my story of what this experience was like for me. And I'll share another poem that's about that as well. And it's specifically about how here in New York City, every night we stand outside and we clap for all of the health workers. And especially in a city where we're so used to being together, often in mass, we're used to being in these crowded subways and crowded streets and in these stores and all of this. And we're all so divided right now. And so that moment every night when everyone leans out their window and claps, it's a beautiful thing because it makes us feel connected and it reminds us that we're not alone and that we have each other. So this is about that. It's called The Dinner Bell. My favorite time of night is 7 p.m. when the applause and hoots and cowbells ring from the outside world, and I lean against the window frame, adding my own solo hoot, and my cat adds her meow, maybe thinking that, like her, we are all calling to be fed. And maybe we are, leaning into the sound of other humans as if it were a crackling fire. Today, I have been in isolation for a month. I haven't touched a human being or spoken to one in person that wasn't a grocery clerk or the urgent care doctor. That time when I had the virus and a worried looking man checked my lungs. You're okay. You need an inhaler, he told me from behind the mask. And I started to cry a little, in gratitude for my lungs, but also for him. Thank you so much, I rasped from behind my own mint green mask. Thank you so much, we roar into the setting sky every evening at dusk. To the health workers, the grocery clerks, the pharmacy staff, the warehouse workers. To each other, our ears angled out to the world we cannot touch. And now that I've done these poems that are kind of about isolation, I like to change things up a little bit and do some things that are a little bit happier and more about community and joy. So this is a poem that means a lot to me. It's a poem that I used to perform in the poetry slams quite a bit, and it's called Pride. The summer I turned 14, my grandmother got me smashed at a wedding in New Jersey. And somewhere in between the fourth glass of champagne and the fifth ABBA song, she turned to me and said, "Someday, Joanna, you're going to have a wedding just like this. And when you do, please don't let them play any disco." And I didn't know how to tell her that I probably wouldn't be having any wedding at all. That I wore these bones like a voiceover when really I was in love with my friend Kathleen. And I thought just maybe, if I held this itch underwater long enough, it would float up blue. Tried to claw the want from my voice every time Kathleen asked what I thought of her boyfriend, tearing all the power cords from my drive-in imagination and burning every lamp in my throat watching her. I learned what shame feels like. I painted my skin with postcard gleam as if the best I could ever hope for is to reflect somebody else's shine, as if there were some parts of me better off drowned in a swimming pool of whiteout. But it is not in our nature to cringe before the mirror like this. A person born blind will tilt their head back and extend their arms when they feel pride. It's in our bones, not to bake shame into our blood, but to live boldly. And so now, all these years later, here is my pride. For refusing to allow the wet blanket stare of strangers on the subway smother this burn to hold her hand. For every time someone has said, "Wow, you don't look gay," and I didn't say, "Thank you." For not allowing my heart to be strip searched by those who want to know if my love is pure enough, because I have already spent years committing hate crimes against myself, and I already know all of those tricks. So when my straight friend asks why there are no straight pride parades, I tell her, you can't be proud of something you've never had to fight for. This is for every wedding I watched from the sidelines, every fairy tale with stipulation, every "it's a choice, it's a phase, you're disgusting," every gay kid who believed nothing would ever make this better because home meant break the parts of yourself that don't fit into the plaster of who you're supposed to be. Well, we already are exactly who we are supposed to be. And a few years back, I found myself living in a place where I could actually get married one day. And I never expected it to mean that much to me, but then I thought back to that wedding in New Jersey, how I was the last one to leave the dance floor, makeup smeared and beaming, how my grandma grabbed my hand as I walked by and said, "Hey, I'm proud of you," with no buts or if-onlys clinging to the underside of her voice, and how finally, all these years later, I'm now able to say the same thing to myself. And happy Pride, since it's still Pride Month, though I know we all celebrate Pride at different times throughout the year, and really we should. Pride should be all the time. I'm going to close out with this poem, which is called Firewood. The world is full of people who do not love me, an ocean of lovers who did not love me back. And yet still, there is my family, my sweet friends, my cat waiting by the front door every time I open it. And though maybe not what we think of as love, there is the man at the bodega on my street who smiles kindly at me when I am so thirsty for kindness my throat aches. There is the bus driver who sees me running through the rainstorm and waits for my breathless entrance. There are those who have left this earth and never my heart, and no one will ever take from me the love from those who stopped carrying it to me as firewood, but handed me the axe and walked away. Thank you so much. So those are my poems. I hope that some of them spoke to you in a way. I hope that you find poetry in your life and your experiences to be meaningful. I think if you connect with spoken word poetry, you will find a lot on YouTube that you can get involved with. Button Poetry is a great resource for that. They have a lot of great videos online. And I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that there is no one right way to write a poem. There is no wrong way to write a poem. The only rule of thumb I would give you is be authentic. It's, speak in your own voice, write in your own voice, tell your own story, because your story is important. I can guarantee you that someone needs to hear it, that just by telling your story, you can inspire somebody, you can make someone feel less alone. And it's important that we tell our own stories in our own voices, because no one else should tell my story or speak for me. No one else should be telling your story or speaking for you. It's important that we all use the voices that we have in the ways that we can. I think that now more than ever, it's so important that we use those mechanisms to get our stories out there, to make sure that people are being heard. We can't just have one voice dominating a conversation. It has to be all of us speaking out, speaking our truth in different ways. So I encourage you to use your voice, and just know that, there are people out there who need to hear you and who want to hear you. And you will find that this community of poets is for you, that there are people out there who will be so eager to connect with you. And I just really hope that you find a home, whether it's in poetry or running or whatever kind of outlet that works for you. But just know that you are not alone in what you're experiencing, that people are out there for you. So thank you so much for listening. Sending you all a hug from New York City.